The war had been raging for 700 years. It began the night the Crimson Veil fell, when the ancient pact between the living and the undead collapsed like rotted silk, and the vampire covens rose from their subterranean courts with a hunger that had festered through centuries of restraint. The humans called it the Sundering. The vampires called it the Awakening. History would remember it as the War of Eternal Night, though by the time Caden Ashford stood on that ruined battlefield at twilight, he wondered if history would remember anything at all. The kingdom of Thornhaven had been the first to fall. Then Silvermere. Then the coastal cities of Breakwater and Saltwind, consumed in a tide of fangs and shadow. The vampires didn't just kill, they converted, building armies from the corpses of the conquered, turning humanity's greatest warriors into weapons against their own kind. It was a war of attrition that mankind was losing, and everyone knew it. The question wasn't if humanity would fall, but when and how many would die screaming before the final darkness came. Caden had stopped counting his battles after the 73rd. He'd stopped counting his scars after the 100th. At 28 years old, he looked 40, lean and weathered, his face a roadmap of violence written in scar tissue and hollow shadows beneath storm-gray eyes. His armor, once the proud steel of the Thornhaven Royal Guard, was now a patchwork of scavenged plates held together with leather straps and desperation. Blood had stained it so many times that the metal had taken on a permanent rust-brown patina, like the armor itself had learned to bleed. He'd lost his family in the first year, his honor in the second, his faith in the third. By the 7th year he'd lost even his fear of death, which made him either the most dangerous kind of soldier or the most foolish. Perhaps both. He no longer fought for victory, that dream had died with the Oracle of Lightspire, whose prophecies had promised salvation but delivered only ash. He fought now because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant feeling the weight of all the empty places where people used to be. The Battle of Greymoor Keep had been another slaughter. 300 human soldiers against a vampire war host led by Lord Malach's the Dreadborn, an ancient creature who'd walked the earth since the Age of Kings. The keep had fallen in 4 hours. Caden had survived by doing what he always did, fighting with the desperate efficiency of a man who'd forgotten how to die, killing until his sword arm went numb and his vision tunneled to a pinpoint of pure survival instinct. When the horns finally sounded retreat, he'd been the last one out, backing through the shattered gates with his blade still singing its song of steel on bone. Now he wandered through the aftermath, alone. The battlefield was a canvas painted in death. Bodies lay in twisted sculptures of final agony, human and vampire both, though the vampire corpses were already crumbling to ash, their unnatural existence unable to maintain form once separated from their animating will. The castle loomed behind him, Greymoor Keep, its walls shattered like broken teeth against the darkening sky. Fires still burned in its towers, sending pillars of black smoke into the gathering dusk. The air tasted of copper and smoke and the peculiar chemical sweetness that vampire blood left behind when it touched the air, like roses dipped in acid. Caden's armor clinked softly as he walked, each step a labor. 3 broken ribs on his left side. A deep gash across his right thigh that he'd bound with a strip of torn cloak. His sword, the faithful blade that had been his only companion through 7 years of hell, dragged in the dirt behind him, too heavy to lift any more. He should find his regiment. He should report to Commander Thorne, assuming the old bastard had survived. He should do a lot of things. Instead, he walked deeper into the ruins, drawn by nothing more than inertia and the strange magnetic pull of desolation seeking its own company. That's when he saw her. She stood in the center of what had once been the keep's grand courtyard, now a crater of shattered stone and scorched earth. At first, Caden thought she was a statue, some monument to victory that the vampires had erected in mockery. She was too perfect to be real, too still, too composed against the chaos of the ruined battlefield. But then the wind shifted, carrying embers from the burning keep, and her hair moved. Gods above and devils below, her hair moved. She was vampire, that much was instantly, terribly clear. Her skin held that peculiar luminescence that the undead possessed, pale as moonlight on snow, smooth as alabaster except for the faint tracery of silver veins visible at her temples and throat where the cursed blood ran slowest. Her eyes, when they fixed on him, glowed with an inner fire, crimson as fresh spilled blood, bright as coals in a forge. They were Predator's eyes, ancient and hungry, set in a face that would have made angels weep with envy. But it wasn't just her beauty that stopped him in his tracks. It was her presence. She wore armor, true armor, not the decorative pieces that noble vampires sometimes affected. Black plate etched with silver runes that seemed to writhe in the flickering firelight, fitted to a figure that managed to be both deadly and devastating. Pauldrons rose from her shoulders like the peaks of distant mountains, and from her back unfurled wings, massive membranous wings that spanned 20 feet from tip to tip, structured with bone and sinew, the membrane between stretched thin enough to catch the dying light and glow like stained glass windows in a cathedral of carnage. A war bride. Caden had heard of them but never seen one. The vampire lord's most elite warriors, chosen not just for their combat prowess but for their ability to inspire terror and desire in equal measure. They were psychological weapons as much as physical ones, designed to make enemies hesitate, to plant doubt in the moment before the killing blow. They were walking contradictions, beauty and death in a single, impossible package. This one was younger than he'd expected, though with vampires, age was always a deception. She might be 50 years dead or 500, there was no way to tell. Her features held an aristocratic refinement that spoke of noble blood before the turning. High cheekbones. A proud nose. Lips that were full and dark, drawn back just enough to show the pointed tips of fangs. Her hair, impossibly long and black as a raven's wing, moved around her in the wind like it was alive, like it had its own thoughts about the world. She was covered in blood, both her own and that of her enemies. It painted her armor in abstract patterns, dripped from the edges of her wings, matted strands of her hair together. In her right hand, she held a sword that looked like it had been forged from a shard of midnight itself, black metal that seemed to drink the light around it. And she was staring at him. Not attacking. Not moving. Just staring. With an expression that Caden couldn't quite read. There was shock there, certainly. Her eyes were wide, her lips parted slightly as if she'd been caught mid-breath. But there was something else too. Something that looked almost like vulnerability? Recognition? No. Impossible. She was vampire. They didn't feel. They didn't hurt. They were hunger and cruelty wrapped in stolen skin, wearing the shapes of the people they'd killed to mock those left behind. That's what the priest said. That's what every survivor knew. The person who'd once inhabited that body was gone, burned away in the transformation, leaving only a clever predator that could wear emotions like masks. So, that look. Caden realized he'd stopped walking. His hand had found the hilt of his sword automatically, though he knew with bone-deep certainty that if she attacked, he was dead. He was exhausted, wounded, barely standing. She was fresh, whole, and probably hadn't even been properly challenged in the battle. War brides didn't die to common soldiers. They were the ones who killed commanders, who turned the tide of battles, who made grown men soil themselves with a glance. You should run. You should at least try to run. Even a futile gesture was better than standing here like a fool waiting to be slaughtered. But his legs wouldn't move. Maybe he was more tired than he'd thought. Maybe those ribs had punctured something important and he was bleeding internally, his body slowly shutting down while his mind played tricks. Maybe he'd actually died hours ago and this was some fevered dream his dying brain had conjured in the seconds between life and death. Or maybe he'd just finally reached the point where he genuinely didn't care anymore. The vampire war bride tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle she was trying to solve. The movement was predatory, that distinctive, too fluid motion that vampires had, as if their bodies remembered being human but couldn't quite replicate the mechanical limitations. Her wings rustled, sending a cascade of dust and ash swirling around her. She took a step forward. Caden's survival instincts finally kicked in enough to make him raise his sword, though the blade wavered in his grip. His arms felt like they were made of lead. The vampire stopped, her glowing eyes tracking the movement, then flicking back to his face. She was perhaps 30 feet away now. Close enough that he could see the details, the way her armor had been damaged in battle, dented and scored by weapons that had come close but not close enough. The silver clasps that held her cape shaped like screaming faces. The small, delicate points of her ears, which he hadn't noticed before. "Don't," he said, and was surprised to find his voice still worked. It came out rough, scraped raw by smoke and shouting, but steady. "I'm not worth the effort. I'm half dead already. Find someone else to kill." The vampire's eyes widened further, if that was possible. Her lips parted more, and he saw the full length of her fangs, elegant, curved, designed by nature or dark magic to pierce and drain with maximum efficiency. But she didn't hiss. Didn't snarl. Didn't do any of the things vampires did before they attacked. Instead she spoke. "You can see me?" Her voice was like music played on broken instruments, beautiful and terrible in equal measure, with an accent he couldn't quite place. Old Empire, maybe, from before the Sundering. "Truly see me?" Caden blinked. Of all the things he'd expected, conversation wasn't one of them. "You're standing right in front of me. Kind of hard to miss." "No," she shook her head sharply, and something in the gesture was almost frustrated. "Human. The others, they look through me. Or they see only the monster. The weapon. But you," she took another step closer, and this time Caden's exhausted body couldn't manage the energy to raise his sword higher. It dipped, the point scraping the ground. "Your eyes. There's no fear in them. No hate. You look at me like I'm—" She trailed off, searching for words. The wind picked up, carrying more embers from the burning keep. They swirled around her like fireflies, catching in her hair, glinting off her armor. The setting sun broke through the storm clouds for just a moment, bathing the entire ruined courtyard in blood-red light, and Caden saw her clearly for the first time. Really saw her. Not just the armor and the wings and the weapons. Not just the vampire and the war bride and the instrument of destruction. He saw the way she held herself, rigid, controlled, like someone carrying a weight that could never be put down. He saw the tightness around her eyes, the microscopic tension in her jaw. He saw the way her free hand clenched and unclenched at her side in a rhythm that spoke of anxiety, of stress, of emotions that vampires supposedly didn't have. He saw someone who was tired. Just like him. The realization should have been impossible. Vampires didn't get tired. They didn't feel. They were eternal, unchanging, locked in the moment of their death and transformation. But this one looked like she carried the weight of centuries, and like those centuries had been heavier than mountains. "Like you're real," she finished finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You look at me like I'm real." Caden didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know what she wanted him to say. His mind, dulled by exhaustion and pain, struggled to process the strangeness of this moment. Here they were, enemies by birth and circumstance, standing in the wreckage of another pointless battle in an endless, grinding war, having a conversation instead of trying to kill each other. It was absurd. It was dangerous. It was probably going to get him killed. And yet, "You are real," he heard himself say. "Whatever else you are, that's real enough." The vampire war bride made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. It was hard to tell. She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, some of that predatory intensity had softened. Not much. She was still clearly dangerous, still clearly capable of ripping him apart, but enough that he could see past it to something else underneath. Loneliness. God, she looked lonely. "I am Seraphine," she said, with the formal precision of someone introducing themselves at a court function instead of on a battlefield. Seraphine Bloodthorn, war bride of the 7th House, sworn to Lord Malich's the Dreadborn, slayer of the Silver Legion, victor of. She stopped herself, a flicker of something like disgust crossing her face. Titles. Always titles. As if they matter. As if they make us more than what we are. "Caden," he replied, too tired to match her formality. "Just Caden. Used to have titles too. Lost them somewhere between here and hell." Seraphine's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile but close. "An honest man. Rare. I'd forgotten they existed." She looked around at the battlefield, at the bodies and the fire and the gathering darkness. "This was the 47th battle I've fought in Lord Malich's name. Do you know how many humans I've killed, Caden, who lost his titles? Does it matter? Perhaps not. I stopped counting after the first 1,000. They all blur together after a while, the faces, the screams, the way they break. She turned back to him, and there was something terrible in her eyes now, something beyond predation. Do you know what the worst part is? I remember every single one. Every face. Every name when they gave it. Vampires don't forget. Can't forget. Our minds are like vaults, storing everything forever, perfect and unchanging. I carry 1,000 deaths inside me and I can't let them go. Caden found himself leaning on his sword, using it like a cane to stay upright. The conversation was surreal, but no more surreal than anything else about this damned war. Why are you telling me this? Because you looked at me like I was real, Seraphine said simply. And I haven't felt real in a very long time. The sun was almost gone now, just a sliver of red on the horizon. Soon it would be full dark, and the vampire reinforcements would come to claim the battlefield, to sort through the dead and turn the useful ones. Caden knew he should go. Should run. Should do literally anything other than stand here talking to a creature that could end him with a thought. But he was so tired. And she looked tired too. And there was something about this moment, this strange, impossible moment, that felt important in a way he couldn't articulate. So instead of running, instead of fighting, instead of doing any of the sensible things, Caden Ashford did the stupidest thing he'd done in 7 years of war. He lowered his sword completely. Let it fall from his numb fingers to clatter against the stone. Stood before the vampire war bride completely defenseless, with his arms at his sides and his head unbowed, and looked her in those burning crimson eyes. "You look beautiful," he said. For a long moment nothing happened. The world seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind died, leaving them suspended in perfect, crystalline silence. Seraphine stood frozen, her eyes locked on his, her expression cycling through a dozen emotions too fast to name. Shock, disbelief, confusion, something that might have been joy, something that might have been terror. Then she moved. It was faster than human sight could follow. One moment she was 30 feet away, the next she was directly in front of him, close enough that he could feel the unnatural cold that radiated from her body, could smell the strange perfume that vampires carried, like roses and stone and distant thunder. Her hand shot out and gripped his throat, not choking but holding, her pale fingers easily spanning his neck. He could feel the impossible strength in that grip, the barely restrained power that could crush his windpipe like paper. But she didn't squeeze. Didn't crush. Just held him there, her face inches from his, those burning eyes searching his with an intensity that was almost painful. "What did you say?" Her voice was trembling. Actually trembling. "Say it again." Caden's heart was hammering in his chest, fear finally catching up with what his conscious mind had known all along, that he'd just signed his own death warrant in the stupidest way possible. But he'd said it and he'd meant it and he'd been too honest for too long to start lying now. "You look beautiful," he repeated, quieter this time but no less firm. "Even covered in blood and death and 700 years of darkness. Even with fangs and wings and eyes that glow like hellfire. You're beautiful. And I don't think anyone's told you that in a very long time." Seraphine made a sound that was definitely a sob this time. Her other hand came up to his face, those deadly fingers trembling as they touched his cheek with a gentleness that seemed impossible from something so dangerous. Her thumb traced the line of a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, following it like it was scripture. 347 years, she whispered. "That's how long it's been since someone called me beautiful. Since someone looked at me and saw anything other than a monster or a weapon or a thing to be used." Her eyes were glistening now, not with tears vampires couldn't cry, but with something that looked like them. "The man who said it was my brother. He said it right before I killed him." Caden's breath caught. "You were turned against your will. Is there any other way?" She laughed bitterly but didn't move her hands from him. "Lord Malachus found me during a siege. I was a soldier then, a real one, not this mockery. I disguised myself as a man to fight, because they wouldn't let women serve openly. I was good. So good that when he broke through our lines and saw me fight, he decided I was too valuable to simply kill. So he turned me instead. Made me into this. His perfect weapon. His beautiful, deadly war bride." Her hand at his throat tightened slightly, not enough to hurt, but enough to remind him how easily she could. Do you know what it's like, Caden, just Caden? To be trapped inside your own body, screaming while it does things you never wanted. To watch yourself kill everyone you ever loved and not be able to stop? I was lucid for the transformation. Where? I felt every moment as the curse rewrote me, felt my soul burning away and this thing taking its place. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, is that it didn't burn it all away. There's still something of me in here. Still enough of the girl I was to remember what it feels like to be human, but not enough to change what I've become. She leaned closer, until her forehead rested against his, until he could see nothing but those burning eyes. I am a monster, Caden. A real one. I have killed thousands. I have enjoyed it. The blood, the power, the fear in their eyes. Part of me loves it. The vampire part. And I hate that part, but I can't cut it out, can't escape it. I ask me now. So when you say I'm beautiful, what exactly are you seeing? The monster? The weapon? Or some fantasy of redemption that doesn't exist? Caden should have been terrified. Should have been begging for his life, or praying to gods he didn't believe in anymore, or at least trying to break free. But he'd been honest before and he'd be honest now. I see someone who hates what they've become, he said softly. Someone who remembers being human and carries that memory like a wound that won't heal. Someone who's tired and lonely and hasn't had a real conversation in 3 centuries. Someone who, despite everything, despite the curse and the blood and the death, still has enough of themselves left to feel pain about it all. He paused, then added, and yes, someone who's beautiful. Both despite and because of all the rest. Seraphine pulled back sharply, releasing him, her wings flaring wide as she stumbled backward like he'd struck her. Her expression was wild now, terrified in a way that was deeply, fundamentally wrong for something so powerful. She looked like she wanted to run. Or kill him. Or both. You're lying, she said, but it came out as a question, not a statement. You're trying to manipulate me too. I'm too tired to lie, Caden interrupted. He stayed where he was, didn't chase her, didn't press the advantage that might not even be an advantage. And I don't have anything to gain from it. You could kill me in half a second and we both know it. There's no manipulation here. Just, he gestured vaguely at the space between them. Whatever this is. This is insanity, Seraphine said. This is, you're human. I'm vampire. We're enemies. This conversation shouldn't be happening. I should kill you. I should have killed you the moment I saw you. Why didn't I? She cut herself off, pressing a palm to her forehead like she was trying to hold her thoughts in. What did you do to me? Nothing. I just told you the truth. The truth. She repeated it like the words were foreign. The truth is supposed to hurt. That's what Lord Malachis always says. Truth is a weapon. Truth is pain. But this, she looked at him and for the first time, there was something like hope in her eyes, fragile and terrified. Why doesn't this hurt? Caden opened his mouth to answer, but the words died in his throat as a new sound cut through the air, the deep, resonant tolling of a bell. Not a church bell. Something older. Darker. The sound seemed to vibrate in his bones, making his teeth ache and his vision swim. Seraphine's head snapped around, her entire body going rigid. No, she breathed. Not now. Not yet. What is that? The summoning bell. Lord Malachis calls his war brides back. She turned to him, and the hope that had been in her eyes was dying, replaced by desperation. I have to go. If I don't answer the summoning, he'll know. He'll punish? She stopped, shaking her head. It doesn't matter. You need to leave. Now. Run as far and as fast as you can and don't look back. What about you? The question seemed to surprise her. What about me? You said you're trapped. Forced to serve. So don't go back. Seraphine laughed, and it was the saddest sound Caden had ever heard. You don't understand. The bond between a vampire lord and their creations isn't just loyalty. It's written into our very essence. If I try to resist, try to disobey the pain, she shuddered. And even if I could somehow break the bond, which I can't, where would I go? Humans would kill me on sight. Other vampire houses would see me as a traitor. There's no place in this world for something like me. The bell tolled again, louder, more insistent. Seraphine gasped, doubling over like she'd been struck. one hand clutching at her chest. Caden saw dark veins spreading from beneath her armor, crawling up her neck like poisonous vines, the physical manifestation of the summoning, forcing her to obey. He moved without thinking, closing the distance between them, catching her before she could fall. She was cold, so cold it hurt to touch her, but solid, real, tangible. Her eyes found his, wide with shock. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Don't, you can't." "Come with me," he said. It was possibly the most insane thing he'd ever suggested, and that was saying something. "I know a place. Hidden. Safe. Where we can." "Can what?" she interrupted. "Playhouse. Pretend this cursed war doesn't exist? Even if I wanted to, even if the bond didn't drag me back, you'd be harboring the enemy. Your own people would execute you for treason. My own people think I'm dead half the time anyway. And I stopped caring about treason around the same time I stopped caring about survival." The bell tolled a third time and Seraphine screamed, actually screamed, a sound of pure agony that made Caden's blood run cold. The dark veins had spread to her face now, pulsing beneath her skin like living things. She tore herself out of his grip, stumbling backward, her wings beating the air frantically. "I can't," she gasped. I can't. She looked at him one last time and there was so much in that look. Regret. Longing. Desperation. "Find me again, Caden, just Caden. If you're not lying. If any of this is real. Find me again." Then she was gone, launching herself into the air with a powerful downbeat of those massive wings, rising into the darkening sky like an angel cast out of heaven. Caden watched her go, watched until she was just a silhouette against the blood-red clouds, until even that disappeared and he was alone again in the ruins. The smart thing to do would be to run. To find his regiment, report what had happened, warn them about the war bride who'd shown mercy. The smart thing would be to dismiss this entire encounter as a hallucination, a trick, a moment of weakness brought on by exhaustion and blood loss. But Caden Ashford was done being smart. Smart hadn't saved anyone. Smart hadn't ended the war. Smart had just kept him alive to fight another day over and over, until the days blurred together into one endless nightmare. So instead of being smart, he made a decision. A stupid, impossible, probably suicidal decision. He was going to find her again. And maybe, just maybe, he was going to save her. Or she was going to save him. Or they were going to damn each other even further than they already were. At this point it hardly mattered. At least it would be something different. At least it would be a choice. Caden retrieved his sword from where he'd dropped it, sheathed it across his back and started walking. Not toward his regiment. Not toward safety. But toward the vampire-held territories to the north, where Lord Malich's the Dreadborn kept his court, where the war brides roost in twisted spires of black stone. The moon was rising now, full and bright, painting the battlefield in silver. In the distance, he could hear the sounds of the vampire forces returning to claim their victory. He should hide. Should evade. But he just kept walking, one foot in front of the other, driven by something he couldn't quite name. Hope maybe. Or madness. At this point they felt like the same thing. 2 months. That's how long it took Caden to infiltrate the vampire territories. 2 months of traveling by night, hiding in ruins during the day, scavenging for food and supplies from abandoned human settlements. 2 months of close calls and narrow escapes, of vampire patrols that passed within yards of his hiding spots, of near misses that should have been deaths but somehow weren't. He told himself it was just luck. Just coincidence. But deep down he wondered if perhaps Seraphine was protecting him somehow, using her influence to steer patrols away, to create openings in their search patterns. It was a nice fantasy anyway. Better than believing he'd just gotten extraordinarily lucky for 8 consecutive weeks. The Dreadborn Citadel rose from the northern mountains like a cancer, a sprawling complex of black stone and twisted architecture that seemed to defy normal geometry. Towers spiraled into the sky at impossible angles. Bridges connected buildings that had no business being connected. The entire structure seemed to pulse with a dark energy that made Caden's skin crawl even from a distance. He'd established a camp in a cave system about 3 miles from the citadel, close enough to observe, far enough to avoid casual detection. He'd spent weeks watching the vampire forces come and go, learning their patterns, identifying individuals. And he'd seen her. Multiple times. Always at a distance, always moving too fast to make contact, but definitely her. Seraphine. His war bride. Not that she was his. But she felt like it in some strange way he couldn't articulate. Tonight was different though. Tonight she was alone. He'd observed that the war brides went on solo patrols every few nights. Territory sweeps, hunting expeditions, reconnaissance missions. Seraphine's route took her along the mountain ridge to the east of the citadel, a path that wound through narrow defile and past sheer cliff faces. Dangerous terrain for humans. Perfect for an ambush. Or for a meeting. Caden positioned himself on a narrow ledge overlooking her patrol route, hidden in the shadow of an overhang. His heart was hammering, not from fear, though there was plenty of that, but from anticipation. What would he even say? What could he say that wouldn't sound insane or presumptuous or just monumentally stupid? I remember me? The guy you almost killed 2 months ago? I've been stalking you. Want to run away together? Yeah. That would go over well. The sound of wings cutting through air warned him of her approach. He pressed himself deeper into the shadows, watching as Seraphine glided past, her massive wings spread wide to catch the mountain thermals. She was beautiful in flight, graceful and deadly, every movement precise and controlled. She banked around a cliff face, and for a moment he thought she would simply pass by. Then she stopped. Hovering there in midair, wings beating slowly, her head turning to scan the cliff face. Looking directly at his hiding spot. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she spoke, her voice carrying clearly in the thin mountain air. I know you're there, Caden, just Caden. I could smell you from half a mile away. She paused. Human. Sweat and steel and that peculiar desperation you all carry. You've been following me for weeks now. Slowly, carefully, Caden stepped out of the shadows into the moonlight. I said I would find you again. Seraphine descended, landing on the ledge with inhuman grace despite the confined space. This close, he could see that she looked different from their first encounter. Thinner, perhaps, if vampires could lose weight. Tired. The glow in her eyes seemed dimmer, and there were new scars on her armor that hadn't been repaired. You're insane, she said flatly. Do you understand that? Completely, certifiably insane. This is vampire territory. The Dreadborn Citadel is 3 miles that way. There are 50 war brides within a 5-mile radius, any one of whom would kill you without a second thought. And you just, what? Decided to take a camping trip? I told you I would find you, Caden repeated. I keep my promises. Why? The word came out almost angry. Why would you do this? Risk this. We had one conversation. One moment. That doesn't mean anything. It can't mean anything. Can't it? Seraphine's hands clenched into fists at her sides. No, it can't. Because I'm a monster and you're human and this war is eternal and there is no world, no possible version of reality, where this ends in anything other than blood and death and regret. Maybe, Caden acknowledged. Probably even. But I spent 7 years fighting in this war, and I've seen nothing but blood and death and regret the entire time. At least this way there's something else too. Something more. What? What could there possibly be? He met her eyes, those burning, beautiful, terrible eyes, and said the thing he'd been thinking for 2 months, the thing that had driven him across hostile territory and into the heart of enemy lands. Hope. The word hung between them like a prayer. Seraphine stared at him, her expression cycling through a dozen different emotions before settling on something that looked like anguish. Hope, she repeated bitterly. Hope for what? A happily ever after? A redemption arc? Some fairy tale ending where the monster becomes human again and true love conquers all. She shook her head violently. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. I am damned, Caden. Literally, actually damned. My soul is forfeit. My humanity is gone. There is no coming back from this. I'm not asking you to come back from it, Caden said. I'm asking you to come forward. To choose something different. To be something more than just Lord Malich's weapon. I can't. The words were ripped from her throat, raw and painful. The bond? can be broken. Everything can be broken. You just need to want it badly enough. And then what? Seraphine demanded. Say impossibly I could break the bond. Say I could somehow escape without Lord Malich's hunting me down and making an example of me. Then what? Where do we go? What do we do? The humans will kill me on sight. The vampires will kill us both for treason. There's no neutral ground in this war. No safe harbor. No. There's the Thornwood Sanctuary, Caden interrupted. A hidden place deep in the Whispering Forest. It was a monastery once before the war. Now it's a refuge for deserters, refugees, anyone trying to escape the conflict. Both human and vampire. Seraphine blinked. That's a myth. A story soldiers tell themselves to justify running away. It's real. I've been there. That's where I was heading when I detoured to find you. He took a step closer, cautiously, like approaching a wild animal. They have wards, protections, magic that keeps both sides from finding them. And they have a witch, someone who knows blood magic who might be able to help with the bond. For a long moment, Seraphine just stared at him. Then she laughed, a broken, desperate sound that was more sob than humor. You're serious? You actually, gods and devils, you're completely serious. I am. This is insane. Yes. We'll probably die. Probably. I could kill you right now. Turn you into Lord Malich's, gain his favor, maybe earn a higher position in the war host. You could, Caden agreed. But you won't. Why not? He smiled, the first genuine smile he'd managed in longer than he could remember. Because you called me beautiful in return. You didn't say it out loud, but you thought it. I saw it in your eyes. And that means this matters to you too, whatever this is. Seraphine opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. She looked utterly lost, standing there on that narrow mountain ledge with the citadel glowing darkly behind her and the moonlight painting her wings in silver. She looked like a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. I'm scared, she finally whispered. I haven't been scared in 300 years. Fear is a human emotion. The curse burned it away. But I'm looking at you, at this impossible thing you're offering, and I'm terrified. Good, Caden said softly. That means you're still human enough to know what matters. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of wind and distant night birds and the faint, terrible humming of the citadel's dark magic. Caden waited. He'd said his piece. The choice had to be hers now. He wouldn't push. Couldn't push. This only worked if she chose it freely. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Seraphine spoke. If we do this, if I even try this, the moment I act against the bond, Lord Malich's will know. He'll send every war bride, every death knight, every vampire soldier and his host after us. We'll be hunted across the entire continent. I know. You'll be branded a traitor to humanity. Vampire sympathizer. Consorting with the enemy. If your own people catch us, they'll execute you just as surely as the vampires will. I know that too. We might not make it to this sanctuary of yours. We might die in the first hour. This might be, probably is, a suicide mission with extra steps. Seraphine, Caden said gently. I know all of this, and I'm still standing here. Still asking. The question is, what do you want? She closed her eyes. Took a breath she didn't need, old human habit reasserting itself. When she opened them again, there was something different there. Something that looked like determination. Like decision. I want, she paused, seeming to test the words. I want to choose. For the first time in 347 years, I want to make my own choice. Then choose. Seraphine looked at him, really looked at him like she was memorizing every detail. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached up and unclasped something from around her neck. A pendant, black iron, shaped like a stylized bat. The symbol of Lord Malich's house. His brand. His claim on her. This is treason, she said, holding it in her palm. The moment I remove this, the moment I cast it away, I'm declaring rebellion. There's no going back from it. I know. Last chance to run, Caden, just Caden. Last chance to throw it away. She smiled then, A real smile, genuine and bright and devastating. Then she turned and hurled the pendant off the cliff with all her supernatural strength, sending it sailing into the darkness of the valley below. They both watched it fall, a tiny point of dark metal spinning end over end until it vanished from sight. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Seraphine screamed. She collapsed to her knees, hands clawing at her chest, her back, her throat, anywhere the invisible bonds had been anchored. Caden dropped beside her, catching her before she could pitch off the ledge, holding her as her body convulsed. He could see the dark veins again, the same ones that had appeared during the summoning, but worse now. They covered her entire visible skin, pulsing and writhing like they were trying to tear their way out of her. "Fight it," he urged, holding her tight despite the unnatural cold that burned his hands. "You're stronger than it. You're stronger than him." "It hurts," she gasped. "Gods, it hurts, everything's burning, I can't." "Yes, you can. You're the strongest person I've ever met. A little pain isn't going to stop you." "Little?" She would have laughed if she could breathe. This is. Her words cut off as her body went rigid, back arching, wings flaring to their full span. Caden held on, refusing to let go even as her supernatural strength threatened to shake him loose. He could feel her trembling, could see the tears, actual tears, blood-red tears, streaming down her face. Then suddenly it stopped. The dark veins receded, fading like shadows before dawn. Seraphine went limp in his arms, breathing hard, even though she didn't need to breathe, her eyes wide and shocked. She raised one shaking hand, staring at it like it was a foreign object. She started. "I can't feel him. The bond. It's gone." "It's actually," she looked up at Caden, those crimson eyes wide with wonder and terror. "I'm free. Gods and devils and everything between, I'm actually free." Then, from the direction of the citadel, a sound split the night. A roar that wasn't quite human and wasn't quite beast, something ancient and furious and terrible. It echoed off the mountains, shaking the very stone beneath them. Seraphine's head snapped around, and her expression shifted from wonder to horror. "He knows. Lord Malich's knows. We have to." "Run," Caden finished. "Yes, that was the plan." Seraphine struggled to her feet, leaning heavily on him. Strange to see something so powerful needing support, but breaking the bond had clearly cost her. She looked toward the citadel, where lights were beginning to flash and swarm, vampire forces mobilizing for pursuit. "Can you fly?" Caden asked. "Not well. Not yet. The bond, breaking it took something from me. My strength, my speed." She shook her head. "It doesn't matter. I can run. Can you?" He grinned despite everything. "I've been running for 7 years. I'm pretty good at it by now." "Then we run together." They ran. Down the mountain, through narrow defile and across treacherous scree slopes, moving as fast as Caden's human legs could manage while Seraphine, weakened but still supernatural, supported him when the terrain got too difficult. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew, howls and wing beats and the terrible rhythmic thudding of something massive giving chase. "They're sending the Death Knights," Seraphine gasped as they paused behind a boulder to catch their breath. "The heavy assault units. Slow but relentless." And, she tilted her head, listening to something Caden couldn't hear. "War brides. At least 10 of them. They're spreading out, trying to flank us. How long until they catch us? At our current pace? An hour. Maybe less." She looked at him, and there was a fierceness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I won't let them take you. Whatever happens, whatever comes. We face it together," Caden finished. "That's how this works now." They kept running, pushing deeper into the mountains, following paths that only Caden knew. His 2 months of reconnaissance paying off now as he navigated through hidden valleys and forgotten passes. Behind them, the pursuit continued, relentless and getting closer. As dawn approached, dangerous for vampires but also for humans exhausted to the point of collapse, they finally reached a choke point, a narrow canyon with steep walls on both sides and only one way through. Caden led them into it, knowing even as he did that it could easily become a trap. But sometimes traps went both ways. Halfway through the canyon he stopped. "Here. This is where we make our stand. Seraphine looked around, assessing the terrain with a soldier's eye. Defensible. Narrow enough that they can't swarm us. But we can't hold this forever. Don't need to. Just need to hold until full daylight. The war brides will have to retreat then. The death knights won't. One problem at a time. They position themselves back to back in the center of the canyon, Caden with his battered sword and Seraphine with her midnight blade. The sun was just beginning to touch the eastern sky, painting it in shades of pink and gold. Beautiful. Probably the last sunrise Caden would ever see. He found he was okay with that. Thank you, Seraphine said suddenly, softly. For what? For seeing me. For calling me beautiful. For giving me back my choice. She paused. For this. Whatever this is. Whatever we're about to become, together or in death, thank you. Caden reached back with his free hand, found hers, squeezed it once. You're welcome. The first war bride appeared at the canyon entrance, silhouetted against the growing dawn. Then another. Then 3 more. They were spectacular and terrible, angels of death in ornate armor, wings spread wide, eyes glowing with predatory hunger. Behind them, he could see the massive armored forms of the Death Knights, moving with inexorable purpose. Seraphine Bloodthorn, the lead war bride, called out, her voice echoing off the canyon walls. Lord Malach's offers mercy. Return now, submit to rebonding, and your death will be quick. The human can even be spared if you... No, Seraphine said, and her voice was steady, calm, certain. I made my choice. Tell Lord Malach's I'm done being his weapon. Tell him, she paused, then added with a slight smile, tell him I finally remembered how to be beautiful. The lead war bride's expression twisted with rage. Then you die together. All forces, attack. They came like a tide of shadow and fangs, and Caden and Seraphine met them together. The battle was brutal, desperate, and far more even than it had any right to be. Seraphine, even weakened by breaking the bond, was still a war bride. Centuries of combat experience and supernatural power channeled into pure, precise violence. And Caden, driven by something beyond exhaustion or pain, fought with the kind of desperate ferocity that only comes from finally having something worth dying for. They moved together like they'd trained together for years, each covering the other's blind spots, their fighting styles meshing in unexpected harmony. When Caden's human reflexes weren't fast enough, Seraphine was there, her midnight blade deflecting blows that would have killed him. When Seraphine's weakened state left her vulnerable, Caden's sword found the gaps, driving attackers back long enough for her to recover. The narrow canyon worked in their favor. The war brides couldn't properly utilize their aerial advantage, couldn't surround them or bring their numbers to bear effectively. And as the sun rose higher, they began to falter, their skin smoking when the light touched it, forcing them to fight from the shadows. But the Death Knights didn't falter. Didn't slow. They just kept coming, implacable and unstoppable, and Caden could feel his strength failing, his wounds accumulating, his mortal body reaching its absolute limit. He was going to die here. They both were. But gods, what a way to go. Then, just as he was certain the next blow would be the last, a new sound cut through the chaos. A sharp, piercing whistle that seemed to split the air itself. The Death Knights froze. The war brides pulled back, their heads turning toward the canyon entrance. A figure stood there, small and robed, holding a staff that pulsed with silver light. An old woman, or at least something wearing an old woman's shape, her face hidden beneath a deep hood. Enough, the figure said, and despite being barely above a whisper, the word carried like thunder. This battle is over. Who are you? The lead war bride demanded. This is vampire business. The human laws of sanctuary do not. I am Grandmother Yaga, the figure interrupted. And you are in my forest now. The thornwood borders extend to this canyon, and I claim these two under the law of refuge. Challenge this if you wish, but know that I have lived longer than your Lord Malach's, and I have forgotten more about blood magic than he will ever know. The war brides exchanged glances, uncertain. The Death Knight stood motionless, awaiting orders. For a long moment, the entire canyon held its breath. Then, from somewhere in the distance, a voice, Lord Malachus himself, speaking through some dark magic, echoed across the mountains, "Let them go. For now. The hunt is more interesting when the prey has hope." It was a clear threat, a promise of future violence. But it was also permission to leave. The war brides withdrew, melting back into the shadows. The death knights turned and marched away with mechanical precision. Within minutes, the canyon was empty except for Caden, Seraphine, and the robed figure. Grandmother Yaga lowered her hood, revealing a face that was both ancient and ageless, lined with wrinkles that seemed to shift and change like water. Her eyes were silver, actually silver like polished metal, and they gleamed with an intelligence that was distinctly inhuman. "Well," she said, her voice now warm and almost amused, "when they told me a human was coming to beg sanctuary for a vampire war bride, I confess I thought it was a jest. But here you are. Both of you. Looking like death warmed over and somehow still standing." She tilted her head. "There's a story here, isn't there?" Caden and Seraphine exchanged glances. Then simultaneously they started laughing, exhausted, slightly hysterical laughter that had nowhere else to go. "You have no idea," Caden managed. "Oh, I have some idea," Grandmother Yaga said. She gestured with her staff, and a shimmering doorway appeared in the air beside her, showing a green forest path that definitely hadn't been there a moment ago. "Come. Let's get you to the sanctuary. You can tell me all about it over tea and healing potions. And young vampire," she fixed Seraphine with those silver eyes, "we'll need to do something about that bond damage. Breaking a blood bond without proper preparation is like trying to remove your own heart with a rusty spoon. Effective but messy. Can you fix it?" Seraphine asked, hope and fear mixing in her voice. "Fix it? No. The damage is permanent. You'll never be as strong as you were, never fully heal from this." Grandmother Yaga smiled. "But I can stabilize it. Make it so you're not slowly dying from the inside out. And perhaps, with time, teach you how to be strong in different ways. Ways that don't require a master's leash." She stepped through the shimmering doorway, and after a moment's hesitation, Caden and Seraphine followed. The Thornwood Sanctuary was everything Caden had promised and nothing like Seraphine had imagined. It was a place out of time, an ancient monastery complex built around a grove of trees so old they remembered when the world was young. The trees themselves were the wards, their roots forming a network of natural magic that confused scrying spells and deflected hostile intent. And it was populated by the strangest collection of refugees Seraphine had ever seen. Deserters from both sides of the war, human soldiers who couldn't stomach the killing anymore, vampires who'd somehow retained enough humanity to question their orders. A few werewolves who'd gotten caught in the middle. Even a pair of angels who'd apparently fallen from grace for interfering in mortal affairs once too often. They lived together uneasily, these natural enemies, bound by a common desire to just stop fighting. It wasn't peace. There were tensions, conflicts, old hatreds that simmered just below the surface. But it was a ceasefire. A refuge. A place to remember what it felt like to be something other than a soldier. Grandmother Yaga set them up in a small cottage on the edge of the grove, privacy being important, she said, for people who'd spent so long being watched and controlled. The cottage was simple but comfortable, with a main room, a sleeping loft, and a cellar for Seraphine to escape the sunlight if needed. The first few weeks were difficult. Seraphine's body was breaking down from the bond damage, requiring constant magical intervention just to keep her stable. She was weak, feverish, which shouldn't have been possible for a vampire, and in near constant pain. Caden stayed with her through all of it, holding her hand during the worst episodes, talking to her when she needed distraction, simply being present when words failed. Grandmother Yaga visited daily, working her strange magic, teaching Seraphine exercises to rebuild her strength through will rather than stolen power. It was slow, painful work, relearning how to exist without the bond's artificial enhancement. Some days, Seraphine despaired of ever being more than a broken shadow of what she'd been. But other days she felt more real than she had in centuries. She and Caden talked. Gods, how they talked. Hours upon hours of conversation, sharing stories from before the war, from during it, from the spaces between. Caden told her about his family. His sister who'd loved to paint, his father who'd been a blacksmith, his mother who'd sung old songs while she cooked. All of them gone now, casualties of the sundering. Seraphine told him about her own past, the girl she'd been before the turning, the soldier who'd fought against overwhelming odds because it was right, the sister and daughter and friend who'd had dreams of peace. She told him about the transformation, the horror of it, the way she'd felt her humanity slipping away like water through cupped hands. They learned each other's scars, physical and otherwise. Learned to anticipate reactions, to understand triggers, to navigate the trauma that both carried like second skins. They learned to trust, slowly and carefully, building something fragile and precious in the spaces between their damaged hearts. And somewhere in those weeks of recovery and conversation and careful trust building, something shifted. The desperate connection they'd forged on that battlefield, the impossible bond born from a single moment of seeing and being seen, it grew, deepened, became something more than survival or mutual desperation. It became love. They didn't speak of it at first. Didn't dare name it as if naming would make it too real, too vulnerable. But it was there in the way Caden's hand would find hers without thinking. In the way Seraphine's eyes would soften when she looked at him. In the way they'd begun moving around each other with unconscious synchronization, their rhythms aligning like instruments in an orchestra. Grandmother Yaga noticed, of course. The old witch noticed everything. "You know this won't be easy," she said one day, finding Caden in the garden while Seraphine slept. "Human and vampire, you're fundamentally incompatible in ways that matter. She'll outlive you by centuries if you both survive. She'll need blood to sustain herself, and while we have donors here, the instinct to hunt never fully goes away. And the war won't stop just because you've found each other. If anything, it makes you both more vulnerable." "I know," Caden said. "But I also know that for the first time in 7 years, I wake up wanting to be awake. I wake up with a reason to see another day. That's worth any price." Grandmother Yaga smiled. "Good. Just making sure you understood the bill before it came due." She paused, then added more softly, "For what it's worth, I think you're good for each other. She's remembering how to be human, and you're remembering how to be alive. That's no small magic what you've done." As the weeks became months, Seraphine slowly stabilized. Her strength returned, though not to the level she'd had as a bonded war bride. She was weaker now, more vulnerable, but also more herself. The predatory edge that had defined her for centuries began to soften, replaced by something that looked like peace. She learned to feed ethically, taking small amounts from willing donors rather than killing. She learned to exist in sunlight for short periods, using protective clothing and charms Grandmother Yaga provided. She learned to be part of a community rather than a weapon in someone's war. And she learned to love, really love, not the pale imitation that vampires sometimes affected. To love with the full, terrifying vulnerability that came from choosing to care about someone who could hurt you, who would inevitably die, who was fragile and mortal and beautiful because of it. Caden, for his part, learned to lay down his sword. Not permanently, he still trained, still maintained his skills in case the war found them, but he learned that there was more to existence than fighting. He took up carpentry, helping to repair buildings in the sanctuary. He learned herbalism from one of the older refugees. He even started smiling again, real smiles, the kind that reached his eyes. They built a life together in that small cottage on the edge of the grove. Not a perfect life. There were nightmares, flashbacks, moments when old instincts reasserted themselves. But a real life, full of mundane joys and small difficulties and the kind of everyday intimacy that both had thought lost to them forever. 6 months after their arrival, on a clear spring evening, they stood together on a hill overlooking the sanctuary, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Seraphine's wings were furled against her back, and Caden's hand was in hers, and for a moment, the war seemed very far away. "I never thanked you properly," Seraphine said quietly. "For that night. For calling me beautiful when I was covered in blood and death. For seeing me." "You thanked me by choosing to be seen," Caden replied. "By choosing this. That's all the thanks I needed." Still. She turned to face him, and in the golden light of the setting sun, her crimson eyes looked almost warm. "Thank you, Caden, just Caden. For giving me back my life. Thank you, Seraphine Bloodthorn, for giving me a reason to live. They kissed then, their first real kiss, tender and careful and full of promise. And if her lips were cold and his were warm, if her fangs were a constant reminder of danger and his heartbeat was a countdown to inevitable loss, well, they'd survived worse. They'd face whatever came next the same way they'd faced everything else. Together. The peace lasted a year and a half. Then the war found them. It started with disappearances, refugees vanishing from the sanctuary's edges, taken in the night. Then scouts reported vampire activity nearby, more organized than usual. Then finally the ultimatum arrived, delivered by a vampire messenger who barely made it through the wards before collapsing from silver poisoning. Lord Malach's wanted his war bride back. And he wanted the human who'd stolen her. He would give them 1 week to surrender themselves. If they didn't, he would bring his entire war host against the sanctuary, breaking the ancient protections and slaughtering everyone inside. The sanctuary council met to debate the ultimatum. Some argued for compliance, give up 2 people to save hundreds. Others argued for defiance, surrender to threats once and you'd be surrendering forever. The meeting went in circles for hours, getting nowhere. Finally, Caden stood up. "We'll go," he said simply. "Caden, no," Seraphine started. "Not to surrender," he continued, "but to end this. Lord Malach's wants me? Fine. He can have me. But on my terms, in a place of my choosing." He looked around the council table. "We challenge him. Formal duel. By the old laws of vampire honor, he has to accept. The old laws haven't been invoked in centuries," Grandmother Yaga said. "And even if he accepts, he'll just kill you both. Maybe. Probably. But he'll kill everyone here if we do nothing." Caden's jaw set in determination. "And I'm tired of running. Tired of hiding. We ran once to survive. Now we fight to protect what we've built." Seraphine stood beside him, her hand finding his. "Together," she said firmly. "We face this together." The council debated further, but in the end there was no better option. The challenge was issued. Lord Malach's accepted. He could hardly do otherwise without losing face among his followers. The terms were set. Single combat, Caden and Seraphine against Lord Malach's and a champion of his choosing. To the death. Winner takes all. If Lord Malach's won, the sanctuary would be spared but Caden and Seraphine would die. If they won, the war host would withdraw and leave the sanctuary alone. Everyone knew it was a death sentence. Lord Malach's had been walking the earth for 2,000 years. His chosen champion would be equally formidable. Caden was just a man, a skilled warrior, yes, but ultimately mortal. And Seraphine, while a war bride, was weakened from breaking her bond. They had no chance. But they went anyway. The duel was held in a neutral location, the ruins of Greymoor Keep, where Caden and Seraphine had first met. Fitting, in a circular sort of way. The battlefield where their story began would be where it ended. Lord Malach's arrived with his full war host, 1,000 vampires strong, arrayed in formation around the ruined courtyard. He was magnificent and terrible, ancient beyond measure, his form almost human but wrong in ways that hurt to look at directly. His eyes were not red but black, empty voids that swallowed light. He wore armor that seemed to be made from shadows themselves, constantly shifting and reforming. His chosen champion was inevitably a war bride, Seraphine's replacement, a warrior named Carmilla who'd been bonded to take her place. She was everything Seraphine had been at full power, fast, strong, merciless. Caden and Seraphine stood together in the center of the courtyard, exactly where they'd stood 18 months ago. The symmetry was not lost on either of them. "Any regrets?" Caden asked quietly as they waited for the signal to begin. "Not one," Seraphine replied. "Even if this is the end, especially if this is the end, I wouldn't change a moment of it." "Good. Because I meant what I said that night. You're beautiful. And brave. And the best thing that ever happened to me." She smiled, that soft, genuine smile she'd learned to wear again. "You're not so bad yourself for a human who can't fly." The signal came. The duel began. It was the fight of their lives. Literally. Caden and Seraphine fought with everything they had, every skill, every trick, every ounce of determination and desperation. They moved as one, their bond deeper than any blood magic, forged in choice and trust and love. Where one faltered, the other was there. When one fell, the other pulled them back up. They fought brilliantly. Fought impossibly. Against all odds, against all logic, they held their own. But it wasn't enough. Lord Malach's was simply too powerful, too ancient, too skilled. And Carmilla was what Seraphine had been, bonded, enhanced, without mercy or hesitation. One by one they landed blows. One by one injuries accumulated. Caden's sword broke. Seraphine's wing tore. Blood, red and dark, painted the stones. Finally, Caden went down hard, Lord Malach's blade through his shoulder, pinning him to the ground. Seraphine screamed, launching herself at the ancient vampire with everything she had left, but Carmilla intercepted her, bearing her down beneath superior strength. It was over. They'd lost. Lord Malach's stood over Caden, his empty eyes showing something that might have been satisfaction. You fought well, human. Better than expected. But bravery without power is just another word for futility. He raised his blade for the killing blow. Any last words? Caden, blood streaming from a dozen wounds, vision dimming, looked past Lord Malach's to where Seraphine lay pinned beneath Carmilla. Their eyes met across the courtyard. And despite everything, despite the pain and the death and the failure, he smiled. Worth it, he said. The blade fell. And stopped. Not through Lord Malach's volition. But because Seraphine had suddenly, impossibly, thrown off Carmilla and crossed the distance between them in the blink of an eye, catching the blade in her bare hand. Blood poured from the wound, but she didn't let go. Her eyes, when they met Lord Malach's, were blazing with something beyond rage. Something like revelation. No, she said, and her voice echoed with power that hadn't been there before, different from the bond's enhancement but no less potent. You don't get to take him. Not him. Not now. Not ever. Impossible, Lord Malach's said. You're broken. The bond. The bond was a crutch, Seraphine interrupted. A chain. A limit. I spent 300 years drawing power from you, never realizing I was strong enough on my own. But now, she smiled, fierce and terrible and beautiful. Now I know what real strength is. Not the power you steal, but the power you choose. The power that comes from having something worth fighting for. And then she changed. Not physically, she was still vampire, still winged and fanged and otherworldly. But something shifted in her presence, in her essence. The air around her began to glow with soft golden light, not the harsh radiance of holy magic, but something gentler. Something that looked like dawn breaking over a dark horizon. This is impossible, Lord Malach's repeated, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Vampires can't, you can't. I'm not just vampire anymore, Seraphine said. She pulled the blade from her hand, letting it clatter to the stones, and her wound began to close, not with vampire regeneration but with that same golden light. I'm not just human either. I'm something new. Something you can't understand because you've never known what it means to choose, to love, to sacrifice for anything beyond your own power. She placed herself between Caden and Lord Malach's, and when she spread her wings, they glowed with that same gentle radiance. The watching vampire forces stirred uneasily. Leave, Seraphine said, her voice carrying absolute authority. Take your war host and go. The sanctuary is under my protection now. And if you ever threaten it, threaten him, threaten any of the people who found refuge there, I will come for you. Not as your slave. Not as your weapon. But as your reckoning. For a long moment, Lord Malach's stared at her, his void black eyes trying to comprehend what he was seeing. Then, slowly he began to laugh, a sound like grinding stones, like breaking glass, like everything terrible in the world given voice. This isn't over, little war bride. You've made yourself into something interesting, but interesting things die just as easily as boring ones. I'll return. And when I do, I'll be waiting, Seraphine said. And I won't be alone. Lord Malach's gestured sharply and his forces began to withdraw, not in defeat but in tactical retreat. This battle was lost, but the war continued. Before he left, he looked at Caden, still pinned to the ground and bleeding, and smiled. She'll watch you die, human. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But eventually. Vampires are eternal. Humans are not. Your love story has a timer, and when it runs out, she'll be alone again. Forever. Think about that gift you've given her. Then he was gone, his war host dissolving into shadows and retreating into the night. The moment they were gone, Seraphine collapsed beside Caden, the golden light fading as quickly as it had appeared. She pulled the blade from his shoulder with shaking hands, already reaching for the medical supplies at her belt. "Stay with me," she urged, her voice breaking. "Please, Caden, stay with me. You can't, after everything, you can't." "Still here," Caden managed, though his voice was weak. "Still, worth it." Grandmother Yaga was there suddenly, appearing from nowhere with other healers from the sanctuary. They worked with practiced efficiency, stabilizing Caden's wounds, preparing to transport him. Seraphine stayed close, holding his hand, that golden light flickering around her fingers like she was trying to pour her own life force into him. "That was quite a display," Grandmother Yaga said as she worked. "Vampire transcendence. I've heard of it but never seen it. When a vampire breaks their bonds so completely, loves so deeply, that they remember how to access their original soul. Very rare. Very powerful. Very exhausting apparently," she added, noting Seraphine's trembling. "Will he live?" Seraphine asked, not caring about anything else. "If we get him back to the sanctuary quickly, yes. The wounds are serious but not fatal. Unlike you, he's still delightfully mortal and thus easier to heal." She paused. "Though Lord Malich's wasn't wrong. Eventually mortality will take him. That's the price of loving a human when you're eternal." "Then I'll cherish every moment I have," Seraphine said fiercely. "Every day, every hour, every heartbeat. And when he's gone," her voice caught. "When he's gone, I'll remember. I'll carry him with me. Forever. Because that's what love means." They transported Caden back to the sanctuary, where he spent the next 2 weeks recovering. Seraphine never left his side, that golden light appearing sporadically as she unconsciously channeled healing energy into him. Grandmother Yaga said it was helping, that her presence was literally keeping him alive through the worst of it. When Caden finally woke fully, clear-eyed and coherent, the first thing he saw was Seraphine sitting beside his bed, her hand in his, looking exhausted but relieved. "Hey," he said, his voice rough. "Did we win?" She laughed, actually laughed, tears streaming down her face. "You idiot. You beautiful, brave, stupid idiot. You nearly died. But did we win? We survived. The sanctuary is safe. Lord Malich has retreated. So, yes. We won." She squeezed his hand gently. "And apparently I'm some kind of transcendent vampire now, which Grandmother Yaga says is very impressive and also very confusing for everyone. I always knew you were special. Caden. I mean it. From that first night, I knew. You were always more than what they made you. You just needed permission to remember." Seraphine leaned down, resting her forehead against his. "He was right, you know. Lord Malich's. About the timer. About me watching you die while I continue on. I'll have to live with that. With losing you. Everyone who loves someone has to live with that eventually," Caden said. "That's not a curse. That's just life. And it doesn't make it less worth it." He reached up with his free hand, cupping her face. "However long we have, 10 years, 50 years, whatever time we get, it'll be enough. Because it'll be real. And it'll be ours." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and gentle, and he could feel her tears, those impossible tears that vampires shouldn't be able to cry, on his face. "I love you," she whispered. "I know I'm supposed to be incapable of it, that the curse burned that away, but I love you anyway. Despite logic. Despite nature. Despite everything." "I love you too," Caden replied. "My beautiful war bride. My transcendent vampire. My impossible miracle." Caden Ashford died on a spring morning, surrounded by the people he loved, in the cottage he'd built with his own hands. He was 58 years old, ancient by the standards of the war where most soldiers didn't make it past 30. He'd lived 3 decades of peace, of quiet mornings and gentle evenings, of garden work and carpentry and the simple joy of existing without violence. His body had finally given out, worn down by old wounds and hard years, but his mind had remained clear until the end. Seraphine held him as he took his last breath, that golden light surrounding them both, easing his passing. She sang to him, an old song from before the war, from before the sundering, from when the world was young and they were both different people. Her voice was beautiful and broken, and the tears that fell were real. When it was over, when the last bit of warmth had faded from his body, she stayed there, holding him, unable to quite believe that he was gone. That the heartbeat she'd learned to time her own existence to had finally stopped. The funeral was held in the grove, attended by the entire sanctuary. They buried him beneath one of the ancient trees in soil that would remember him, with a marker carved with the words, Caden Ashford, soldier, builder, beloved. He chose love. Seraphine stood at the grave long after everyone else had left, staring at the freshly turned earth, feeling the weight of eternity pressing down on her shoulders. This was it. The timer Lord Malach's had mentioned. She'd known it was coming, had tried to prepare, but nothing could really prepare you for this moment. She was alone now. Would be alone for centuries to come. Maybe forever. The thought should have broken her. Should have sent her spiraling back into darkness, into despair, into the monster she'd been before. But it didn't. Because Caden had been right. The time they'd had, it had been enough. Not because it was long, but because it was real. Because every moment had mattered. Because they'd chosen each other over and over, day after day, building something beautiful in the ruins of a broken world. And she carried him with her now, not as a weight but as light. In her memories. In the lessons he'd taught her. In the way she saw the world, the way she moved through it, the way she chose to be in it. You made me human again, she said softly to the grave. Not by changing what I am, but by reminding me who I was. Who I could still be. She placed a hand on the marker, that golden light flickering around her fingers. I'll keep that promise. I'll remember. I'll carry you. Forever. And I'll live in a way that honors what you gave me. She stood there until the sun set, until the stars came out, until the night wrapped around her like a familiar cloak. Then finally she turned and walked back toward the sanctuary, toward the life she'd built, toward the community she'd sworn to protect. She was alone. But she wasn't lonely. Because you could carry people with you even after they were gone. Especially after they were gone. That was the secret Lord Malach's had never learned, that no amount of power could teach, that love didn't end with death. It transformed, evolved, became something deeper and more enduring. In the years that followed, Seraphine became a legend in her own right. The transcendent. The war bride who remembered how to love. She defended the sanctuary against all threats, using that golden light that had awakened in her through love and choice. She taught other vampires who came seeking escape from the war, showing them that there was another way. She built schools, hospitals, places of healing. And she never forgot the human who'd looked at her on a ruined battlefield and called her beautiful. Who'd seen past the monster to the person beneath. Who'd given up everything, safety, honor, his very life, just to give her back her choice. Every spring, on the anniversary of Caden's death, she would sit by his grave and tell him stories. About the sanctuary, about the people they'd saved, about the world slowly learning to heal. She told him about her life, which was his life too, in all the ways that mattered. And sometimes, when the light hit just right and the wind moved through the trees in a certain way, she could almost hear his voice replying. Worth it, it seemed to say. All of it. Every moment. Worth it. And she would smile, that soft, genuine smile he taught her to wear again, and agree. Because love wasn't about forever. It wasn't about immortality or eternity or transcending death. Love was about choosing again and again to see someone, to value them, to fight for them. Love was about looking at a monster and calling them beautiful. Love was about being seen and choosing to see in return. And that was worth everything.